Hello and welcome to the Olive Tree with me, Julia Fisher, where each week believers in Jesus living in Israel share their stories. Recently, I met Evan Thomas in Haifa in northern Israel. Evan was born into a Jewish family in New Zealand. It was there he met his wife, Maala, and approximately 30 years ago, they moved to Netanya, a city just south of Haifa, on the shores of the Mediterranean, where Evan has been the pastor of a congregation called Beit Asaph. Recently, they returned to New Zealand for 3 months to take a break, or so they thought. They hadn't been there long before they had quite a surprise.
Yeah, we sure did. Of course, having the break and starting to find our health again after a pretty hard year, I would say, 2018. And then suddenly discovering that the Lord was giving us assignments that we had no expectation really of, as different Maori Christian leaders were connecting with us and desiring to draw from our life experience in Israel and myself walking as a Jewish follower of the Messiah. Now, what's the connection? Well, in New Zealand right now for the last couple of years, there's clearly a growing, I would say, revival amongst Maori, which is who are highly integrated into New Zealand society, but with a harsh conflict narrative from the early settlements and their hard relationship with the Crown and indeed with the church, with a big part of the mission, so to speak. And after early revivals in the mid-19th century, there was an enormous falling away. So the church really, really became a white church in New Zealand, even with Maori people within it. It didn't have the tradition or the language or those aspects that are so rich in Maori culture. Well, that's changing with this new awakening, I would say. Now, together with that awakening is remarkable, but in almost all cases, these Christian movements, not all, but most, are also receiving, I would say, a revelation about Israel and their connection to their Jewish roots. So much so that large groups of them are traveling to Israel, connecting with local communities, local congregations here in the land, and really, really involved in establishing a relationship with Israel and the Jewish people. And it's coming not because a whole bunch of wise teachers have come through the country teaching their agenda or anything, but really by personal revelation that they are somehow connected to it. Now, again, because of the difficult conflict narrative in their history, conflict with the church, that is to say, a lot of these movements, these new Maori Christians, are really exploring what does it mean to be Maori and a follower of Jesus. Well, I'm kind of a natural address to go to because through relationship they realize that I have 40 years of experience of my own personal journey of what it means to be Jewish and a follower of the Messiah, and all the implications of that and the complications of that vis-a-vis the church and Gentile-dominated Christianity, culturally and otherwise. So they are wanting to glean from us, and then a sideline to it is that we are finding ourselves connecting also with a number of Maori community leaders who are not Christians. In fact, I would say quite pagan in their outlook of the ancient Maori ways, but in many cases very educated, highly politically savvy, with a broad geopolitical understanding. Many of them our age, and some of them actually school friends of when Maala, in a small town in New Zealand, was a 5-year-old child coming from Finland, speaking no English, and the Maori kids who were in her class spoke no English. They were coming from the marae and from their communities, and they found a natural bond with this little blonde, blue-eyed girl from the far north of the world. And today we're reconnecting with numbers of them and just openly sharing the gospel with them and praying with them. And we have favor like very few people have, simply because of who we are and where we are and those early connections. So God's given these assignments that we had no anticipation of, so that when we travel to New Zealand for the first quarter of the year, that we step into a whole another area that really is bringing connection from the ends of the earth right back to where the gospel began.
It's an extraordinary story, but your heart, Evan, has always been for reconciliation between Arab and Jew within the Israeli context. But also you recently, in particular the last few years, you have been very mission orientated. And perhaps one of the few leaders in the land to really take this on board and actually physically see Israelis being light to the nations. And here it is.
It's happening. It's starting. And this is something that began as a dream is now really taking on some concrete evidence. And for us, I saw it as a natural extension of our activities and reconciliation. It came really when I realized from the scripture, my personal realization, that reconciliation is not an end in and of itself, but it's designed by the Lord. It's a kingdom thing that is one of the key tools to be able to express the truth of the gospel of the resurrected Messiah. When you see people come together from conflict backgrounds, whose peoples might hate each other, still shed blood of one another, but when they step towards one another and choose to go out and spread the good news, it's what it was always designed to be. It just took me a couple of decades to realize that. And so that's what I'm motivated towards.
And so let me ask you now to look forward, because the question, as you know, behind this program is, what is God doing despite the politics and the troubles? So what are you anticipating? Where are you anticipating this is going? You've had a big surprise, but you must have a little bit of understanding as to the bigger picture.
I think there's a few things going on. What I see, there have been movements going on for 70, 80 years, particularly from, if we take the China model, the back to Jerusalem model coming out of China already, what was 70, 80 years ago, something like that. That movement, that was a mission movement. Their whole concept was to take the gospel back, share it on the way, and take the gospel back to its point of origin. and missionizing all the way. Well, that's happening in particularly out of Asia and the maritime nations. And now a few of us are connecting with the maritime nations of the Pacific Rim, which they are themselves forming huge councils of wise elders, all of whom carry this back to Jerusalem and connection with their Jewish brothers. And so December we'll be having a large gathering in Nazareth. Of course, with me somewhere in the middle of that mix, of course, it has to include our Arab neighbours, to the point now they will be actually hosting it in December, together with the Messianic leaders. So I'm so jazzed about this sort of stuff, because those are my early origins down in the South Pacific. And so all of that is coming back. So you'll see elders coming in from amongst the Maori, Samoans from Fiji, Vanuatu, from Papua New Guinea, and on New Caledonia, and on and on. Great numbers of them bringing members of their flocks to the land.
Well, Evan, I think we're going to look forward to following this story. Thank you very much.
You bet.
You've been listening to Evan Thomas, a Messianic Jewish pastor in Netanya, Israel. The Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a Christian charity based in the UK that supports the needs of both Jewish believers and Arab or Palestinian Christians living in Israel and the wider Middle East. If you'd like to know more about our work through our bi-monthly newsletter, including news about our upcoming tours, please either visit our website www.olivetreefund.org or write to me, Julia Fisher, OTRF, PO Box 402, Billingshurst, RH14 4BQ in the UK. Meanwhile, join me at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.